Hey everybody, welcome to, September 10th MakerDAO community call. We do these community calls every Tuesday. We use them kind of as a springboard for our community as well as kind of the greater DeFi, Ethereum developer, financial primitives community in general. So besides the usual of covering the MakerDAO universe, things like partnerships, interesting topics in the community, governance issues, governance topics, et cetera. We also occasionally have some guests. And today, with great pleasure, I'm going to be introducing Victor Roortvet. I hope I pronounced your last name right, to the call. Victor was one of the hackers at ETHBoston, which just passed, and he has a really awesome hack called Tribute. So Victor, you want take it away, man. Love to hear what Tribute's all about.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks again for the invite to the call. Very excited to show you guys in the larger Maker DeFi community what we built. I'm joined here on the call by Brian Chow, one of my teammates from the ETHBoston hackathon. Pat Gallagher and Ethan Wessel were the other two partners. So I just want to give them a little bit of heads up credit. They're not on the call with us right now, though. Okay, so let me go ahead and kick it off. Let me start sharing if I can.
So what is Tribute? Like, what's the one sentence explanation of what it is?
Yeah, sure. So the one sentence explanation is that it's a subscription micropayments abstraction layer that's built on top of existing Dai contracts. And I'll go into exactly what that is for those that aren't familiar, to essentially enable a frictionless user interface that allows people to essentially pay for things on the internet only with the interest that they're making on their crypto assets, which right now is just Dai. But it's a pretty powerful tool to be able to pay for things without your principal balance going down. So one of the sort of ideas that inspired this was the idea that we needed to hack the psychology of money, and that there's this kind of primal joy that comes from buying something, but the number never goes down. So we have this kind of caveman slogan of number never goes down. That kind of animates what makes Tribute a useful contribution to the DeFi.
Yeah, I think a lot of people relate to that, especially me. Like, I made my first $20 on Compound, and it was probably the most exciting $20 I've ever made in my life, because I probably spent hours just like looking at my screen like this as like the interest accrued, and you know, to think that $20 can pay for a couple lunches or something like that. It's a really exciting concept, and it preps people for like retirement mentality, right? Like live off your interest almost. Totally. So really like that.
What I want is for us to build something that gives you another epiphany like that. And it's the moment you pay for your Netflix subscription or your utility bill with just the interest on your Dai.
Basically free.
Yeah. All right. Basically free. It's going to feel like free. All right. Let me go ahead and try to show you guys what's going on here, and then we'll talk more about what it means. Okay, so I'm going to share, switch over here. All right, are you guys seeing this?
Yes, this is pretty sweet.
Okay, so that was the little nutshell encapsulation. But really what we've got here is a very abstracted layer. We did not write any new smart contracts here. We did not do anything that sort of builds any critical piece on top. This is just simply a React UI overlay on the things that have already been built and that we're really inspired by. And so to go into a tiny bit of kind of the history of what we're building on top of here, especially for those who aren't keeping up to the second with all of the Dai variants and what they do and how cool they are. What we have at the very base of this stack, which probably I'm assuming everybody on the Maker community call, I don't need to explain what Dai is, but Dai obviously is the stable coin, the best on earth, in my opinion, that is essentially in the sort of context of what we're going to build on top of it here, it's money at rest. Dai is the money that is just sitting there, chilling out, doing nothing, but it's stable, which is great. So on top of Dai, there is Compound, right? You talked a second ago about how great it feels to watch your Dai grow because of the ability to earn interest off of it because of a matching program that finds other people that want to borrow Dai. And so you can grow your Dai through lending it on Compound. And that's really great, but it's also sort of the traditional interest model, right? Where the interest is accruing right back into your wallet, and then you have to decide, okay, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to go take that interest and sell it for some other asset, or take it out and sell it for some other asset? but it really involves a kind of a transaction, right? You don't get to sort of just point the interest somewhere else. Our Dai, I think, is this really, really, really powerful smart contract because it allows you to essentially redirect the flow of interest. And what we built on top of that is something that really, I think, tries to showcase the really transformative power of being able to redirect interest. And so here we are on the Tribute kind of homepage. And so what we've got here is a Covan testnet that we're on. And this Covan testnet has 1,000 Covan Dai in it, right? And that's our principal. And as I said earlier, number never goes down. This number never moves, right? This never, or it never goes down, at least. It can go up. But this is one of the key kind of psychological kind of rocks of the whole thing. And then you see over here, we've got unallocated tribute, 1,000 Dai. It's the same number here, right? And what we're calling tribute or unallocated tribute is essentially the interest that is related to the Dai. So every single one of these Dai has some interest that's flowing to it using Compound. And in fact, this is actually happening right now. We've hidden that from you. It's actually kind of a stealth savings module that's going on. But really what's happening right now, at least in Covan, which isn't, it's not real money, but if this were on mainnet, you'd actually be getting the benefit of the Compound, roughly 10% or so interest on Dai that's flowing back into your principal. And you need to actually do a transaction to kind of redeem that Dai or that Compound Dai back into Dai that would actually increment the number there, at least unless we want to try to build the UI to kind of do that calculation itself. But essentially, this is what Compound is right now. And you can see below here, we've got tribute flows. This is empty. There's nothing that's happening here. But this is where, when you are pointing your interest anywhere other than your wallet, you'll see that here. Down here, this is kind of
quick question.
Sure.
For eventually, right, when publishers actually begin to kind of specify their addresses in mass, what do you see as being kind of like the primary registry or like verified place where you might find a publisher address?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think there could be any number of different market solutions to that. I don't think that we're conceiving that we would be the ones responsible for that. I think you would want to have a number of different types of publishers of either white lists or recommended lists, and you could kind of see, because one of the things we were thinking initially is, oh, what if we could somehow enforce what we consider to be better ethical Web 3.0 practices, such as don't force ads down people's throat and certainly don't harvest people's personal data, as the surveillance capitalism model. But that's obviously where we want to go with our sort of refiguring of the financial economy. But with something like this, we didn't have any way to really enforce that. I mean, I guess in theory, we could try to put extra strings on being able to incorporate this. But I think what we're imagining is that you would in the future have some sort of trusted repository, and you would, like a TCR, as it were, that would say, here are the people that are doing it right, that are not harvesting your data, that have really good, tribute sort of integrations, and that you might want to be interested in. So short version of that is, the market will build something.
Got it.
We're not going to do it ourselves.
Yeah.
So anyway, so down below here, you've got these, this is basically dummy data of what could be, tributes that you've interacted with in the past, things that you've sent tribute to in the past. But this is just sort of for the purposes of this demo, kind of what it might look like. And then these two tools, we won't really go into too much. They're not, fully wired up yet. Obviously, the GitHub link. But then this would be the way that a publisher would actually pull out the R Dai that's coming in as interest and turn it back into Dai that they can go around and spend on things. So, okay, so this is your page as we, I think I've gone through kind of what it looks like here. And then we want to click over here for a second. And what we are looking at right now is the website for Super Mariano Brothers, everyone's favorite racing game, named as tribute to our favorite Argentinian head of oracles of MakerDAO, Mr. Conti.
So he is the head of backend services now, or no? Is that Nick?
I thought you were
smart contracts now.
Contracts,
but I still love the oracles title.
Oh yeah, you sound like
still our favorite.
Yeah, straight out of a video game, man. Head of oracles, love it.
And the tribute is certainly flowing to you, no matter what your title is, Mr. Conti. All right, so we're on this website, and we want to play it, right? And this is a tribute-enabled DApp. And what that means for Super Mariano Brothers, the publisher of it, is they have specified an Ethereum address that they want to receive the tribute, and the tribute here is actually R Dai, which is redeemable for Dai. And it's the trickle of R Dai that comes out of interest from the various underlying Dai that stays in your wallet. And so he needs to specify, or the publisher needs to specify, this is the address that I want you to send this RDAI to. And he also needs to specify what the meter rate is. And the meter rate is just how much it costs to access this data. And there's a couple of different ways we could design this for different types of dApps, but this is a game streaming dApp where you are paying for every time that, or every second that you're playing the game. And so the meter rate that we used for this particular example is that Super Mariano Brothers costs 1 Dai cent per hour. So 0.01 Dai need to be flowing to this address in order for you to have access to Super Mariano Brothers. And as soon as that, if you're directing less than 1 Dai cent per hour to it, you won't get access. And if you direct more, maybe you'd still have access, but the tribute is designed to actually get it to be exactly 1 Dai cent per hour. So here's how that works.
So quick question. So if you are not generating enough interest at any given time, are you, well, hold on, let me kind of reframe the question. This assumes kind of a continuous model rather than a traditional discrete model where like for Netflix, you pay $30 a month or whatever, and like you just have a month. Here it's kind of like, you kind of pay as you go.
Right.
If all of a sudden you are not generating enough interest to pay, are you still ending up paying them just like instead of 90% or 100%, you're paying them 90% and you like totally lose out on that 90% and don't even get service?
So the answer is no, because the publisher essentially bears the risk of the interest rate going down. And they have to build that in when they set their meter rate. So if the interest rate is 10% when you first start playing Super Mariano Brothers, and then it crashes to 7% like a minute later, the publisher is receiving less RDAI per hour, right, at a 7% interest rate than they were at a 10% interest rate. But because the transactions are totally controlled by the user, the publisher has to basically accept that risk in the way that it's designed right now. Now, there's a couple of other things that I could talk about that are baked into some of the things that your question there about something being essentially more expensive than the user currently has, free flowing interest to be able to pay for. But I kind of want to save that for the end, and I just want to show you
sure.
this version of it. But the one thing that is important to know is that the publisher does bear the risk, and that when a user has allocated tribute, essentially, if it was what the publisher specified and it met the meter rate at the moment that the tribute started flowing, then access must be continuous until the user shuts off the tribute. Okay, so here we go. When we click the tribute button here, what's going to happen is tribute itself is going to look up the meter rate. That's the first thing it's going to do, and it sees that Super Mariano needs 1 Dai cent per hour of interest to get access, and then it's going to take that number and it's going to go fetch from Compound what the current APR is on Dai, which is the underlying asset. And so we used a round number of 10% hard-coded for this demo because it's nicer to see a round number there. And so if you had a 10% interest rate on Dai and you need to throw off exactly 1 Dai cent per hour of interest, Tribute calculates exactly how much of a stack of Dai you would need to allocate to generate that 1 Dai cent per hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, and so that number here is 876 Dai. That's what throws off exactly 1 cent of interest per hour. And because you have 1,000 unallocated Dai as tribute potentially here, you are able to allocate that tribute and get access to this site. There's a little box here that explains that your Dai never leaves your wallet, the number never goes down, but that while you are allocating a tribute to Super Mariano Brothers, the interest from that 876 Dai will be flowing to Super Mariano Brothers, not back into your wallet. So, that takes us back to the dashboard screen we just saw. Again, the GitHub connection there. And then, so we're going to go ahead and allocate the tribute here. And then everyone's favorite polygonal fox comes up. And what's actually happening here is we're interacting with the RDAI contract. And a quick description of what's actually happening there is we're submitting a transaction that is saying, pay interest according to this new bucket system. And the bucket says, here are the 2 addresses that I now want to pay interest to, which is my original address and now the Super Mariano Brothers address. And then the second part of it that matches exactly the same number of variables there is essentially what percentage to put to each of them. And without getting into too much more detail, that's roughly how it works. And you can continue to split that. It doesn't just have to be in 2 places. And the way that RDAI conceives of this is what's called a hat. And that's a hat. A hat is saying, here's how many addresses I want to split my interest among, and here's the proportion that I want to split them along those things. And so we've created a new hat, and that one hat says, instead of just putting 100% of the interest back into my account, we're going to put essentially 87.6%, which is, because we have 1,000 Dai, it's a round number, of the interest is going to go to Super Mariano Brothers while the tribute's flowing. Okay, so now, sorry, is everybody with me? Any questions?
Yeah, that was a great explanation. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now we have, we saw the MetaMask confirmation pop up. We've got our tribute thing is turned green, showing that the tribute is flowing. And then it tells us right here, tribute is flowing. And were we to have built and integrated the game, here's where we'd be racing around. And Super Mariano would, of course, be defeating Super Luigiano and all the other failed attempts to dethrone Super Mariano. So we're having a good time. We're playing this. Oh, and one thing that I should have done before I hit allocate tribute, but I think is still worth looking at here. All right, let's pause for 1 second. I apologize. This is a tiny bit less perfectly organized than I wish it was, but let's go back to the dashboard, right? Because we've now allocated the tribute, and the dashboard looks different now. So the dashboard is querying our principal, still showing the exact same principal. That Dai has gone nowhere. But our unallocated tribute, the portion of interest that is now flowing back into the wallet and that is available to be redirected to different addresses around the web, has dropped from 1,000 down to 124. And we can see where that tribute is flowing. We now have an active tribute flow to Super Mariano. That's the address that it's flowing to. And this is the amount of tribute that was required to access that content, right? Everybody with me? Is that sort of
that is so cool.
So far?
Yeah.
Cool. So then let's go over here and let's look at the smart contract. Okay, so we are on the Kovan network. I don't know if I said that yet, but that's important. So the redeemable Dai, our Dai contract, this was deployed at ETH Berlin, is here. And this is what we can use to sort of figure out what's going on with our DApp and the recipients of the interest right now. So this is the address 2243. Let's check again here. You see Super Mariano 0x2243. I've populated that here, and this was the amount before we started allocating the tribute that had been already accrued into Super Mariano's interest kitty, essentially, of our Dai, and that was before we started it. You have to take my word for it, but we'll query this. I can't remember if it's gonna. Yeah, so it went up a little bit here, but then now this is an important number to just take a look at. You'll see what happens when I query it again in a second. So 293099 at the end. We'll come back to this, but it's just important to see that address has this amount of interest payable in it at this particular moment. Okay.
So yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on real quick. So is it that, they're constantly receiving it, or does it like send it in batches? Like how does RDAI work when you point interest towards an address?
Per block. It's the exact same function as CDAI. And in fact, RDAI is kind of built on top of CDAI because when you say RDAI, you're actually implementing the R token.
Right.
And so,
so the value changes and there's no actual transaction. So the transaction only happens, and all of it happens when you trade that RDAI back for Dai or whatever, when the publisher withdraws it, right? That's the whole purpose of the withdrawal button, right?
The kind of thing is continuing, but people can monitor what's happening in the accrual, that's happening in real time, even though, you're not actually like submitting transactions, which makes it usable, because if you had to submit a transaction to check what it is, then it would be terrible. Okay, so we saw the Kovan account balance for Super Mariano Brothers, and now we're kind of done playing the game. Super Mariano was victorious, as he always is, and now we open this up and we see that we can end the tribute. So the user always has the power to do this. This is never something that the DApp itself is empowered to do. They can't shut people off. It's all directed by the user. So we're going to end that, and essentially what we're doing is just the reverse of what we did before. We're sending a new transaction that says, okay, we're going to go and make a new hat for our principal, and that hat is just 100% of all the interest is coming back to the principal address. So you're essentially, and in fact, the transaction, there's something called change hat. So when you first set up RDAI, it creates a hat for you that is you have all the interest coming to your account. And when we went to the Super Mariano Brothers website and allocated the tribute, it created a new hat that split the interest between Super Mariano Brothers and our principal account where our Dai is. And then what we did just now was change that hat back to the first hat, which is the 100% of interest coming back to me. So now we see the sort of same screen that we saw originally. I think the MetaMask transaction confirmed.
Yeah, I saw it confirmed. Yeah.
And then so when we refresh this, it should look like it did at the start, where we have, of course, the same 1,000 Dai, number never go down, but we have the 1,000 unallocated tribute that is now available again to redirect to whatever addresses that we want. And then we go back to Kovan here, and this is where Super Mariano is incentivized here. We're going to query the interest payable of for this account, and hopefully, if everything went well, this number here should go up. There it is, number go up. So Super Mariano just got paid. The user got to play just as much as they wanted. If you would have forgotten to turn off the tribute and you went to dinner or something like that, yeah, it's a little bit of egg on your face, but really you're not in any kind of catastrophic financial predicament. You're just not earning interest during the time that tribute's flowing. And we built this dashboard to really kind of let people see all that and manage it and turn them off.
So question.
Yeah.
So I remember watching Andreas Antonopoulos like in 2016 or 2017, and he was talking about you can get in a car and the money that you pay to your insurance will not be monthly. It will be based on exactly how much time you drive the car, for example.
Right.
Tribute seems to do this pretty much for anything. So like, let's say New York Times was a publisher and you only read the Times for 1 hour a day, whereas there's other users that read it maybe for like 2 or 3 hours a day. You can actually turn on your publication and turn it off at the cost of like the transaction, right? I guess that's the premium. But this kind of enables that kind of continuous service model, which gives the user a lot more efficiency and gives, I guess, the pubs and the service providers a little bit less money, but more realistic kind of pricing for their customers, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, one of the things that we're excited about here is that because there's essentially a psychology hack that's working here, that users are just more willing to do it. It hurts more to pay out of pocket, see money go out the door that never comes back, number go down. And that is just a permanent sort of feature to what it feels like to sort of transact in the kind of like number go down world. And what this is doing is hiding the fact that your number would otherwise be going up, or it's basically future paying on something that you have as essentially a collateral interest-bearing asset, that there's some sort of predictability about what's going to be thrown off of that, at least in some sort of normal, hours and days kind of timeline. And you have publishers that essentially are going to have the potential to get a lot more customers purchasing their services because of the fact that it doesn't feel like purchasing. If we've done this right, this should feel like magic. This should feel like I'm buying something for free. And because people don't have kind of a gut, let's say, expectation that they should be getting interest, it doesn't feel like anything is really being taken from them in the same way that it does when you see the number go down, right? So this is all kind of more psychology and philosophy, but we think that this is a pretty powerful way to present this kind of information that we don't consider to be too unfair or duplicitous or deceptive to a user. And in fact, what the deceptive aspect is actually that there's something positive happening behind the scenes. It's not negative. The deceptive thing is that we're hiding the fact that you're using Compound essentially to earn money off of your unallocated tribute here. But we're just not really showing you that because we felt that if we were to say, oh, do you want to just earn interest on this? Then you kind of have this almost dilemma of like, oh, do I want to do the more pragmatic, prudent thing of earning my interest and like, what would my dad say kind of thing versus going out there and buying something.
So then question, so like when you have unallocated tribute, would your principal be going up then?
It is behind the scenes. So like actually, and I don't know 1,000% how they do this in like integrations of Compound, but at least with our Dai, there's an actual process that that you have to call a transaction called redeem that essentially pulls out the interest payable of and turns it back into Dai. And then that would be what would show up there. But I think there'd be an easy way to sort of read that and sort of like, mimic what it actually is, the value there. And that would be ticking up, right? So anyway, there's a few different ways to think about that UI issue. But it certainly is like a very positive thing that's flowing back.
Yeah, and that's tangential. I mean, I look at this thing and I just am totally in awe by the sheer amount of potential that it has. So I guess maybe the last question that I'd ask, and I'm inviting anybody who's watching right now to feel free to ask questions in the chat or just butt in if you have a microphone. But my last question is going to be, what do you see as the future for this thing? Are you guys going to be developing it out? Are you guys going to make this into a bigger project than just a hackathon project? What's your vision?
So I can't speak for my teammates, except for maybe Brian can pipe up in a second here. He's on the call with us. But since ETHBoston, which was an incredible experience, it's, you're so exhausted and then you're so elated, and then it's just this whole thing that you go through. And then I woke up yesterday morning and it was like, oh, that's pretty cool that we built this thing. And then in the process of yesterday morning through coming back home to DC, I completely fell in love with this. And I kind of feel like this is now my calling to make this real. And I'm in this weird state, and I don't want my teammates, I'm not trying to speak for them here, but I'm in this weird state where I feel so deeply that this is such a wonderful thing that I'm almost willing for somebody else to build something better, as long as I'm pointing people at this and saying, this is what we got to do. And if somebody can come up with something that's even better, then that's great, because that's going to be net positive for humanity. I also think that we can build something really amazing out of this, because I've got about 1,000 ideas of ways to make this even cooler for all kinds of different things. I haven't even talked about open source contributions here yet, but that is a, dummy, low-hanging fruit thing when you're talking about Tribute, where you show up on GitHub, and on somebody's GitHub repo, there's a little button. You hit the button, and it says, hey, you want to throw 10 Dai's Tribute at this project because you believe in it and you want to support open source? That costs you nothing, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But if all the people that care about open source can do that, and we can even make something on this dashboard that kind of like gives you extra kind of like
options, suggested pubs,
Well, there's that part, but I'm saying more like a sort of like reward, or like a sense of like, here, we're giving you a little shine here because you're doing the right thing, right? You can kind of like use the UI to be like, here are the angelic things you're doing with your flows.
Little NFT trophies.
Appreciates this. What's up? Yeah, NFT trophies potentially, it could be that. But like, if you can see that you're not just contributing 10 Dai to a GitHub repo that's important to you, but that what's the total amount of interest that's supporting that project, and that then you can even have like a little meter that shows this project is sustainable based entirely on the Tribute flows of people that are contributing on Tribute. I mean, like, I'm sorry, this is just one of the different avenues that caused me to be like so deeply in love with this idea that I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah, man.
I'll talk about it for about 3 hours if you let me, so I'm gonna have to cut myself off here.
Yeah, your demo fired me up, that's for sure. I mean, this is so cool.
And also, I think we're the coolest thing in DeFi right now. I don't want to be too arrogant about that, but like, this feels a little bit like a final form of DeFi. And I'm not saying in the sense of we stop building here, but it's kind of like if we're talking about money Legos, this is one of the towers.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the sort of parapet of that tower.
That's why I mentioned Andreas Antonopoulos earlier, because like that whole vision, that was like one of like the main things. I was just like, holy crap, yeah, continuous versus discrete. Like that whole paradigm shift of continuous versus discrete, and like being able to programmatically, like, just if you have a really comfortable user interface and a really comfortable way to do this automatically, it's really powerful.
I'm getting some vapors here. I really get excited about this, but it's awesome. And I should also just briefly mention that we talked about a meter system, but you would really be able to design this well for different types of content consumption.
Sure.
And then you can even design this, we talked about this a little bit, and I think it's feasible, and whether it's advisable, another issue, but time locking your interest. You could buy stuff. Like, you could go buy a new computer, and it would say, we're going to actually do it on the fly and figure out how much you're calculating. It's not going to do the thing where it locks in your interest rate, and then it just is a set number of blocks or whatever until you get enough to get the computer. But it would actually be seeing, how much is actually flowing into this account. But you could literally say, I want to buy a computer. And it's almost like layaway. If you guys, there's probably only a couple of you on this call that have ever heard that term before, but what it was something I remember being popular in the 80s, where relatively economically moderate and people that were on this sort of like end of the spectrum where they didn't have a ton of disposable income wanted to buy a cool Christmas present for their kid, and they could go to Toys R Us, and you would pay like $10 a week for for November and December. And then at the end of that, you got to walk out and get this toy for your kid, right? It was this weird way of kind of like hacking the psychology of money to get people to do the things that they want. And essentially you could do this here too, where you could say, I need a new computer. It's going to take on average 3 weeks of dedicating all my tribute that's unallocated to, you know, the account that the computer needs. But as soon as that moment comes, boom, it ships, right? Like, I mean, that's feasible with this. And it's a very different model than what I just showed you. But when you're talking about directing streams of money that people can then use in the real world, and you're making it abstract and you're making it accessible, I mean, I think we've got something here. We've got something that just needs to be built. So
it actually, one more thing. Yeah, we could talk about this for hours, geez. But one more thing that it pops into my mind was that, like, you know, I imagine that the people retiring in like 30, 40, 50 years can use something like this even to fund things out of retirement accounts, like futuristic retirement accounts, right? Like this whole idea generally. And the fact that it's like here built over a weekend at ETHBoston, just the bare bones of it is it's really, really something. You know, it's really cool that we could do, you know, use these primitives like our Dai, Compound, Maker, Dai itself to build these kinds of services and platforms. And I see Brian is mentioning something. Brian, if you have a mic, you could feel free to jump in. If you don't, I'm happy to read it for you.
How do I stop sharing my screen, by the way? Oh, there we go. Never mind.
All right, no worries. So I would also like to add that when thinking about the content creators, this is an alternative revenue stream as opposed to ads. The money you get is directly contributed by your audience. Yeah, absolutely. That's actually kind of the reason why a lot of people, and me too, really like models like Brave, right? But yeah, Brian, there isn't a third-party advertising platform in control of your money and what ads you need to show. Yeah, totally. It helps break that ad, you know, that reliance on the ad world, for sure. So yeah, this is really cool.
There's 2 more things I want to add here. I'm sorry I'm sucking up all this time, but I really think it's an important idea.
It's all good. This is great. Yeah.
So the first is this metaphor that, like, when I said earlier that Dai is your money at rest, and then Compound is essentially your money going to work for you. You know, it gets up and it goes to the office and it earns more money, right? Our Dai and Tribute enabled our Dai is essentially your money. It gets up and it goes to work, but then it gets out of work and it heads across the street and it runs an errand and it pays your utility bill and it does all the things that you actually do in your financial life, rather than having to, you know, take stuff out of your Compound account, make all these active choices. And essentially it's like always hustling for you. And that's a vision that I think frees up, not only gives people a lot more economic power, but it also then frees up a lot more time. Just think about what the efficiencies there about not having to actually pay these things. You know you're subscribed to Netflix, you know you're subscribed to, or you pay your utility bill this way and whatever else. And you can build a lot of different UIs to sort of help people manage those things so that they're not caught out. But that kind of perspective is very attractive. So that's thing 1. And thing 2 is, well, this is entirely built on Dai right now. So I was saying earlier that our token is not just about Dai. So in theory, people could hold USDC. People could hold even ETH, and anything that is an interest-bearing asset. You know, in the future, when we tokenize stocks, when we tokenize other assets, you know, you could have your Apple stock is the thing that's generating the tribute that then you can send places, and all that will be abstracted away. And all you're doing is just pointing the fire hose of interest that's coming out of this thing at the things that you want to support and pay for in the world, including just yourself, paying yourself forward. So anyway, that's my whole why I'm in love with this and why I think it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, Victor, it was a real pleasure having you on the call. This was one of my favorites in quite some time. Thank you for the demo. I'm sure people on the call enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it. And so with that, I'm going to launch into our regular scheduled programming, which is just to go over some of the stuff that's going on at MakerDAO. So, and by the way, before I launch into that, Victor, if you have like a handle that people could reach you at or whatever, feel free to post it in the chat. Also, I'll tweet out this recording once it's out. So, yeah. Are you interested in hiring for this, or are you currently still just wrapping your head around what you want to do with this thing?
So again, I'm speaking without having talking to my team about next, but what I want is for the community to engage with this right now and see what we can build and get lots of people's energy and focus on it to the extent that there's people that are interested in this stuff, and then we can figure out how cool we can build it. That's what
I like it. Awesome. Cool. So with that said, launching into some of the stuff that's going on in governance in MakerDAO. So if you guys are obsessed with Dai like I am, you might have noticed that Dai has been trading at a bit of a premium for the last week or so. I think it's been trading at around $1 and a penny pretty consistently. And so we have had, over the last 2 weeks, stability fee adjustments. And we've gone down all the way to, I think, we're at 14.5% now. So the same way that we aggressively pushed up the stability fee, it seems that Maker Governance is pushing it down in order to prevent this premium from being too consistent. So so if you haven't caught on yet, Dai is very much a free-floating peg, and Maker Governance, at the moment, it's pretty much one of the only things it votes on is the monetary policy of Dai, which is just to say that they use the stability fee as like a policy tool to control the peg. And so they try to make Dai cheaper to create, so as to create more supply, so as to balance out the market. And then when Dai is like oversupplied in the market and it's trading below $1, make it more expensive to create Dai. And so it kind of shrinks the Dai on the market. And so naturally, you should be seeing that reflected in the free floating peg on the spot markets. So right now, there is a governance poll live. It started on September 2nd. Sorry, no, that's wrong. It started on September 9th. Yes, September 9th. And it's ending on the 12th. Yeah. So it's ending on the 12th. If you're an MKR holder, vote for your decision on what the executive vote this coming Friday should be. So like my brain is mashed up thinking about tribute. But yeah, so currently there's a stability fee adjustment poll. Feel free to voice your opinion. Governance polls in MakerDAO are basically to establish soft consensus in the community around what we want actual kind of executive votes to be. So the next executive vote is going to be on Friday, and it's going to be a result of the current governance poll that's happening. And so, yeah. And also this week, yeah, so the lowering of the stability fee to 14.5%, it happened on the 7th, so 3 days ago. Yeah, geez, that was a little bit jumbled up. Sorry about that. Besides that, if you're interested in governance, we've been working really hard as a community to make it easier for people to jump in and kind of see the governance at a glance. And so one of our really awesome community members, Long for Wisdom, actually created a long-running forum post in our forum.makerdao.com discourse forum, which is the primary place where I'd say our governance community interacts with each other and talks about matters and tries to come to logical conclusions to what we should do as a governing body. And so there is a new link to this governance at a glance thread. I think every 2 or 3 months, Discourse requires, like, locks the forum thread. I think we might need to change that, but either way, yeah, there is a governance at a glance thread, and you could see all of the current affairs, some help wanted stuff, the long-standing discussions that we're having, kind of, I already said current events, right? Yeah, just what's going on in governance. So it's a really easy place to kind of get caught up really quickly and to kind of pick and choose what threads you really want to dive deep into if you're more interested in one thing or another. You certainly don't have to dig into everything unless you want to, and then go for it. But besides that, we had a few cool things. As you know, as many of you might know, we've had a couple of mandates going on for the last month about risk teams and about the interim governance facilitator role. Both of these things are actually also in a governance poll right now, which is live. I think it was live. It's supposed to be live for 8 days, and I do not have the dates for when they end, but I think it's overwhelming majority of people are voting yes on these mandates. And the mandates are basically just kind of formally and softly enough defining these things. So risk teams in MakerDAO assess collateral, and they're kind of like delegated parties by MKR holders to do the actual hard work that professionals need to do to judge these new collaterals that we're going to be onboarding in multi-collateral Dai. And then likewise, the governance facilitator is just basically Richard Brown, but when it's not Richard Brown, it's just a person that is project managing, organizing, and kind of keeping governance. It's kind of like the head of a committee minus the authority. So it's just somebody to help organize decentralized governance in MakerDAO, and eventually it's expected to be a compensated role, pretty much out of stability fees in multi-collateral Dai. We also saw this week the introduction of Oracle's V2, which carries along with it just the hint of a few different proposals, including like a bigger kind of Oracle team mandate, which is going to be released, I think, this coming week by Nick, who is our, I always forget these titles. Everybody's titles are always changing. It's horrible. But yeah, Nick, he's spearheading this thing. So he's putting out a few proposals, and if you're interested in what they are, certainly check out the introduction to Oracle's V2 blog post that came out, which I could post over here. I'll be posting the title, not the link. That's no bueno. So, and in last week's Thursday call, we actually devoted about 45 minutes of the call to Nick, and Nick ran through the entire spiel of what the 4 proposals are and what Oracle's V2 might look like. And the TLDR of it is basically right now in single collateral Dai, the foundation controls the oracles. There's only, there's 14 pseudonymous feed providers, and currently the foundation is pretty much footing the bill for, they're paying the feed providers to provide these feeds, and they're keeping their anonymity. But eventually in multi-collateral Dai, which is the transition we're going to be making, is that oracles are going to be given to the DAO, to MakerDAO. And the governing community will have to vote in Oracle teams, which are the ones who deploy oracles, who handle maintenance, handle unexpected issues, et cetera, but also they may be transforming oracles into almost a business model. Oracles are going to have whitelists. They're going to be self-sustaining. They're not going to be kind of really expensive overhead for the system, because they're ultimately going to be a service that will be being provided to the greater community. And so there's a bunch in there. There's even a proposal to make the oracles free for the first year for anybody. And there's a lot of good reasons to do that. And I think the sentiment in the call was overwhelmingly for that. So definitely look into it. It's probably one of the most interesting things happening around multi-collateral Dai that people haven't really caught on to yet. Oracles are a really big part of making blockchain usable in general. And yeah, so go look into it. So, all right, cool. That's about it for governance. There's a few we got what, 10 minutes? Yeah, all right, cool, we have time. And by the way, if anybody here in the call wants to interrupt me or ask for clarification, feel free. I'm happy to converse about any of these things a bit more deeply if you'd like. Also, if you have specific questions, ask. All right, cool. So as for partnerships, integrations, grants, I think we only have partnerships and integrations. So Dai stablecoin is supported in MoonPOS. MoonPOS is like a crypto point of sale system, not too dissimilar from people like Chain and DexPay, though I do not know the specific differences because I do not have the bandwidth to read everything. But nevertheless, it's really nice to see point of sale systems including Dai. It seems like kind of an obvious thing to do. And so moving forward, Chainsulting is now accepting Dai for security audits and consulting services. They're one of many different audit and consulting service companies that have been accepting Dai in recent history. I think last week there was 3 or 4 of them that announced that they'd be accepting Dai. Next we have, with the release of 1.0, MakerDAO's Dai stablecoin is now fully integrated and available for use within Flare Wallet. And I don't know much about Flare Wallet either, but it seems pretty popular. Yeah, look into it if you're interested. And then lastly, we saw Nodebrick, which is a South Korean game company. They're adopting Dai in their gaming ecosystem, mainly in their game Infinity Star, and they're seeking actually to integrate it even more deeply. But at the moment, you're able to use OpenSea as a peer-to-peer marketplace for the NFTs found in Infinity Star, and that's kind of like where the Dai connection is. You could use Dai as a currency to buy stuff and own stuff in the game and like in real life, because we're in real life. All right, cool. So that's pretty much it for the partnerships. Yeah, maybe I should put new hires above partnerships. But in the land of the Maker Foundation, we have a couple of new hires, which is really exciting. Well, one of them specifically is really exciting to me. But we have Derek Fossman, who is coming on as a product manager in the Copenhagen office. And then we have Marc-André Dumas coming on as an integration engineer. Mark has been part of the Maker community for quite some time, even before me. I mean, I've been seeing him around for many years, and he's actually the guy behind the MakerDAI bot, and I think the MakerRect bot as well. But yeah, Mark is on our team now, and it's really exciting. So yeah. A couple of things from the Maker blog. I already covered Oracle's V2, so I'm skipping that. And then the second thing that came out on the Maker blog that's worth noting is our post on how to run your own auction keeper bot in multi-collateral Dai. So in single collateral Dai, there are no auctions. There is just a thing called the liquidity providing contract, which is to say the collateral that gets liquidated, it's just sold at a flat discount and anybody can buy. There's no auction. In multi-collateral Dai, there's actually 3 different auction mechanisms to facilitate pretty much all of the functionality of the systems when it comes to the transfer and sale of various assets, right? So auction keepers are bots that people run in order to do kind of the same things that they would do in single collateral Dai, which is to liquidate collateral and purchase it, and hopefully earn a profit on the spread, on the discount. Auction keepers also participate in buying MKR when there is MKR issuance as a result of under collateralized CDPs. And then auction keepers also participate in, actually, yeah, it's 2 main auctions, but the mechanism, there's 3 different mechanisms. We can dive into it in a different call. And actually, I think we might have already. If we had, I'm going to do a little bit of research. If we have, I'm going to post up the link in the agenda for you guys to see. But either way, yeah. And then with that blog post, we also came out with an auction keeper bot setup guide. So yeah, feel free to try those out and play with them in the Kovan, MCD Kovan testnet deployment. All right, cool. Then moving on to some community highlights. We have a ton of developer creations this week. We saw DeFi Saver actually introduce automatic CDP liquidation protection and leverage increase. So the idea behind their CDP liquidation protection is that as it hits a certain threshold that I think you define, as your collateral is losing value, it actually takes a little bit of collateral out and gradually keeps a buffer between the actual price of your of ETH in this case and your liquidation price. So you don't actually ever get liquidated. It just gradually sells it down until you have an empty CDP. So it's a really great tool to use if you are tired of losing sleep over your almost liquidated CDP. Next, we saw this week that Pooled Together V2 is live. I personally have been really excited about that. Lossless lotteries are freaking awesome. And so now they have their V2 is really cool because you could just buy tickets and you don't have to come back every like 15 or 18 days. You could actually just leave them in there and they roll over, which is really exciting.
David, one quick thing. Can I just butt in for one quick second to give a big ups to Pool Together, because that was where the seed for Tribute came from. The no loss idea of like, what can we do when there's free money out there?
Oh yeah.
Basically. So I just want to give them intellectual, I guess, like attestation. Or
I guess. They'll appreciate that for sure. Yeah, they were even on the call a few weeks ago, and actually in ETH Berlin, they gave me a demo of V2 before it even came out. So haha. But yeah, it was, they're really great. I have so much love for that project, and I'm really excited because soon in the next things that they're going to be launching, they're going to have things like Philanthropic Pools, and I don't know if you know about this yet, because they'll actually be doing something similar to Tribute, where the lossless lottery, instead of awarding a prize to one of the actual pool contributors can, like, I think it's that they vote, or there's a separate DAO that votes on potential recipients of the prize, and you could pretty much create a lottery between 3 or 4 or 5 or 100 different charitable organizations or nonprofits or open source projects. There's different types of kind of like these philanthropic pools that you could do, which is a really cool idea as well.
That is just great.
Yeah. So moving forward, besides that, for developer creations, we saw a ton of DeFi submissions from the ETHBoston hackathon, and one of them you saw today, Tribute. But I linked a few things in the agenda. And by the way, if you're in the call and you missed the link to the agenda doc, it's right here. And if you're listening on YouTube, that agenda doc is actually a master document. You can see all of the old agendas there as well. And everything that I talk about in this call, or at least almost everything, is linked. So you could do your own research and kind of dig around into some of the stuff I'm talking about. So that's going to be in the description, and you could find it in a bunch of different places. And if you can't, just message me wherever you want. I'm like everywhere. But yeah, message me. I could send you the link, and you could do some deeper dives into whatever you find interesting on this call. So Spencer Newman had a tweet storm about the hacks. DeFi Prime tweeted about the hacks. A ton of people tweeted about the hacks, but here are some of the ones that I highlighted. There was this thing called GDAI, which is another form of Dai, another Dai primitive, which allows the sending of Dai without having any ether for paying gas, which is really cool because having ether is kind of it's a friction point for sure. Every time I try to send my friends Dai, it's like I also should probably send them like a little bit of ETH, and if GDAI is a thing, or if wallets can integrate something like GDAI, like if MetaMask Mobile had GDAI native or something like that, that would be so cool. But either way, it's really exciting to see what's on the horizon for crypto and for Ethereum specifically, because things like GDAI are so necessary if we're gonna scale our usership of all of these interesting products and applications that we're creating as a community. And so moving forward, besides GDAI, we also saw Compound. Yeah, Team Tribute loves GDAI. Oh yeah. So moving forward, we saw a project called Compound Commerce. And the idea behind Compound Commerce is that you make interest on crypto receivables and donations while they sit in the smart contract. You collect the interest with Coinbase, and you manage it with a Gnosis multisig. I know that's a lot to wrap your head around, but if you want to look into it a little bit more, the dev post is linked in the agenda. Next, the next one I highlighted is this thing called Suma, which is it provides flexible hedges for DeFi interest rates, so easy that somebody with no crypto can do it. And actually, I kind of don't understand what it does just reading the description. Or I understood it when I initially looked into it. So Okay, users who are lending tend to want to lock in high interest rates, or at least do not want to see their interest rates fall. Oh yeah, so it's basically a way for people to do interest rate locks, is my understanding, right? Providing flexible hedges for DeFi interest rates. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do some more reading on that, but nevertheless, a really cool financial application built over a weekend. The next one is CDRW, which is actually a play on the CD-ROM, but also a play on certificates of deposit. And so this thing is called a decentralized certificate of deposit. And it has a really sleek UI. I'm actually giving it my personal award for the coolest. Yeah, I'll post it again. This is probably the coolest like UI that I saw, because it's like gray and white, and there's a CD-ROM like at the top of it. It's just something, you know, primal comes out in me when I see such ancient technology that I saw when I was a young teenager or something. Yeah, cool. So, oh no, yeah, not Sumer, right? Yeah, cool. So yeah, Akiva, that's there. So yeah, besides the decentralized certificate of deposit, I'm also highlighting Tribute, which we dedicated the first half of this call to. All right, cool. So that's it for developer creations. I'm also gonna note some articles and some notable Reddit threads. Actually, before I do those, I'm actually gonna note a couple of videos, and somebody that's become a part of the community in recent history that I want to highlight. Chris Black is freaking awesome, man. The guy does really, really great videos, and he did a couple of them, and we actually are commissioning him to help us do kind of a Dai beginner series. And so with his YouTube channel, he's doing some really great stuff. So this week we saw stablecoins, centralized versus decentralized, which is part of the Dai beginner series. And we also saw, oh no, I actually didn't link the other one, but he did a general video of why do we need DeFi on Ethereum when we already have Bitcoin. And the most recent one he did is what is Dai governance and why you should care, which is what I'm going to put in the agenda shortly, but I will do it later because we're already at the top of the hour. Yeah, so that, you know what, I'm happy to cut it there. If you guys need to head out, you guys can. I will actually save some of the stuff that I didn't cover in the agenda for next week. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. Yeah, those 3 videos that he put out this week or in the last week and a half are really solid. Definitely suggest checking them out. And if you have friends that are new to the space that are interested in kind of this side of crypto, show them his videos. They're really great for learning. They're really great for the casual viewer. So with that being said, thank you all for coming to today's community call. It was a real pleasure having you, and hope to see you guys again soon.
Thanks, David.
Sweet.